So welcome everyone out there to our Cornerstone conversation we're having today. We'd like to thank you to Dr. Carson, of course, founder and chairman of the American Cornerstone Institute, doing great work to really fight for American values all across the country. So we're thankful to have Dr. Carson with us today. And we are also very glad to have Daniel. Please correct me for your last name. Is it Idfrense?
Idfrense.
Idfrense.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, but you get used to it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Daniel, for joining us. So glad to have you with us today to have a chat with Dr. Carson. And just to kind of set up the conversation here, one of the issues that we've all been witnessing over the past months and years in our country is this whole wokeness ideology, which basically is an effort to redefine everyone's identity based on race and then split people into groups of victims and oppressors. And if you're a minority, that means you're a victim. And if you're not, that means you're an oppressor. And this narrative has been very aggressive, especially in education, but not only education, even in corporate America and the military whatsoever. So it's been quite a wave that's been spreading throughout the nation. So amidst this backdrop, American Cornerstone Institute, we've been doing a lot of outreach and speaking, and Dr. Carson has been doing a lot of spectacular outreach on this issue to just kind of get us grounded back to normal and back to logic and non-craziness, which is the idea that we are all individuals and we need to be judged as individuals. And we're not going to go down this path of putting everybody into racial groups of victims and oppressors. That's not the American way. We need to return to our founding values, which is excellence based on judging due to individual character. So kind of with that backdrop and with this wave of wokeness we see in the nation, we happen to be made aware of Daniel's great article that was on Barry Weiss's Substack, which 17-year-old Daniel Idfrense shared his experience as a high schooler interacting with the wokeness culture, and how he sees so many of his classmates just really jumping on board with it, and how he is kind of bucking the trend of standing up for what is right, which is fairly judging individuals based on their ability and the content of their character, and not diving headfirst into this kind of very divisive ideology. So, Nano, just wanted to kind of, I guess, ask you first, could you share with us your experiences and what led you to write your column where you shared what's been happening?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that my story definitely really took hold around during the time the pandemic took over. And for, the pandemic obviously wasn't a good thing for our country, but I would say there are some benefits, especially to my life. And it was, I tell people, it is the ability for me to create or formulate my own worldview without outside forces. And so for many students, they get a lot of their, unfortunately, a lot of their values from teachers. That would be fine until you realize that these teachers are resentful ideologues and intend to turn students into that as well. And so for me, during the pandemic, being in my house and during the summer at my aunt's house, I spent a lot of time being able to listen to podcasts, to look over. I used to be on a debate team. I looked over facts that, before when I did debate, to me, it was just a competition. I just wanted to win. And so I would just amass all these facts about different current events, like the death penalty and Medicare for All and UBI and whatnot. And I never really got a chance to really sit down and think about them. And so during the last year and a half, I believe, during the last year and a half, I've been able to just sit down and really listen to podcasts, read books and whatnot, and come to my own understanding of the world. And so I would say that is the ultimate. I would say that is the my experience right before I would say being Daniel Idfrense politically. Of course, there's a longer story about how my parents raised me, how what schools I went to when I was in middle school and whatnot. But it was really during the pandemic I really got a chance to think it all through and to formulate my own worldview.
Thanks, Daniel. And Dr. Carson, I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on this, considering Daniel's experiences, especially how the pandemic opened up an opportunity with him being remotely learning as opposed to in person to explore content out there, whether it's podcasts or whatnot. And I think with the work we're doing here, Dr. Carson, and your voice out there, I think is part of what people are discovering too, to get an alternative viewpoint to what they see in the media, or in the case of Daniel, as students. What has been your experience, sir, as you've spoken with folks around the country, spoken with educators and other people? What is people's take of what's happening in education and how these changes from the pandemic are affecting how wokeness spreads or doesn't spread?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud of Daniel. To see a young man like him who is articulate and willing to speak up for themselves, and that manifests a great deal of courage. And, that is probably the thing that is missing largely in our society today. We have people who sometimes even have the right belief system, but they're afraid to say anything. And, if you're not willing to stand up for your beliefs, you're very likely to lose out in the long run. And that's why, our Star Spangled Banner says, the land of the free and the home of the brave. You can't be free if you're not brave. So Daniel, congratulations to you. Please maintain that sense of courage, because that's going to be very necessary, particularly in your generation. And as I travel around the country, and I've been doing a lot of that lately, very large, enthusiastic crowds who want to be encouraged, particularly when it comes to the educational front. You have to recognize what's going on in our country. Nikita Khrushchev, who you may or may not know about, Daniel, this was like 60 years ago. He was the Putin of that time. And he said to President Eisenhower, your grandchildren's children will live under communism, and we will never have to fire a shot. Well, what did he know? He knew that all they had to do is gain control of our educational system so that they could indoctrinate the young people. And they've done an incredible job. They've been working on it for 60 years, taking a long-range view. And then he knew also that they had to gain control of the media so that you could parse out to the people only what you wanted them to know. And you could hide the things that you did not want them to know, and that most people would not be diligent enough to search and read and find out for themselves what's going on. They just listen to the CNNs of the world and get one particular point of view, which is ideologically skewed. And then he also knew that you would have to replace faith in God with faith in government and make people dependent upon the government. And then in order to gain real dependency, you had to be able to redistribute the wealth. And the way you do that is you increase the national debt to astronomical levels so that you can justify massive taxation. And if you're observant, you'll notice that those are all the things that are going on in our society right now today. I think people are waking up to this. They say it's always darkest before the dawn. But it's pretty dark now, so I think the dawn's coming. And, people are recognizing what's happening to our country. And I think they're going to stand up. I think we're going to get through this, because I'm not sure a 4-seat majority in the House is enough to switch from our system to socialism. I don't think that it is, quite frankly. But it's going to require everybody to be courageous, recognizing that, liberty is a precious commodity. That's why there's so many people in different places around the world who want to come here. This is their destination country. If this country was systemically racist, then why would people be forming caravans trying to get in here? It doesn't make any sense. But one of the things that I've noted, there is a significant income wage gap between whites and blacks in this country. It has shrunk. There's no question that we're making progress, but it's still pretty significant. Interestingly enough, the left says it's because of racism and systemic racism. But I'm not sure that that can completely explain it, because if you look at Ghanaians and Nigerians who come to this country, there is no wealth gap. And what is it about them that's different? An enormous emphasis on education.
Yeah,
And
definitely. Is it fine if I cut you off?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, I was gonna agree with you. So with systemic racism, the argument is essentially that any disparity between races is a sign of a outside force, an outside oppressive force. The example being systemic racism. One thing I want to note here is this idea is informed by what Thomas Sowell talks about in Intellectuals in Society. He talks about abstract beings, and I note this in the piece I wrote. Thomas Sowell writes that when you believe that everybody is an abstract being, and so everybody is capable of doing the same things, or there's no cultural differences or genetic differences or anything like that, then those disparities must be explained by something outside of that. And so I think systemic racism is in part informed by that. But again, like you were saying, I mean, factually speaking, there was a ton of economic growth in the Black community between Reconstruction in the 1960s. What I personally believe happened to the Black community, first, the cultural differences. The 1960s, the birth control pill, the invention of the birth control pill, it's overlooked a lot in the 1960s, but it really changed. I mean, American culture in general, and definitely it hard hit the Black community. If you look at shotgun marriages, we used to believe that if you got a girl pregnant in the United States, you have to marry her immediately because that's a responsibility that you cannot drop. And shotgun marriages decrease rapidly in the 1960s. If you want to look at the welfare state, I think that the welfare state is a great example, but there's also other examples. I would say that if you look in the 1960s, that's when immigration reform happened. And so a lot of the Black community, I would say Black America, had very specific jobs during that time. And when you increase the minimum wage rapidly, which did happen in the 60s, it started, I think the first minimum wage law, correct me if I'm wrong, happened in the 30s, correct? I think it did.
That sounds about right. I have to go back and check though.
But in the 60s and 70s, the minimum wage increased dramatically, and you're also letting in immigrants. And so these jobs that Black America had are now being replaced. They're being taken by immigrants who are coming into America. And then in the 70s, it's no mistake, in my opinion at least, there's no mistake that in the early 70s, gangs started to form. Selling of drugs and whatnot started happening because Black America got displaced out of their jobs, and the culture also took it changed dramatically. And so with nothing else to do, those in the Black community resorted to being in gangs and whatnot. And here we are today. I would say that the cultural divide still stands. And if you look at Black teen unemployment, young Black men should be working. They should be whatever low wage jobs there is. They should be dishwashing. Learning, being in the system and having stake in it, but they're not. And that's, I believe, from what I've researched, stems from that sort of time period. Sorry for cutting you off, but I wanted to know that.
No, I think those are very good points. And the other thing you have to recognize for these young men with broken families, they often grow up in an environment where there's no real authority figure. And the first authority figure they run into is either a policeman or somebody in their community who's badder than they are. In either case, it's not a good result. And then, what is emphasized? You see all these stories about these mega contracts for the basketball players or the football players or the rap singers. And people are thinking, I'm going to be one of those people. And, forget about this academic stuff. I don't need to worry about that. I'm going to be real successful in this. But how many of them actually are successful? How many people actually, who might actually be pretty talented at basketball, are going to actually get an NBA contract? Very, very few. And if you do become a professional athlete, what is the average length of that career? 3.5 years. And many of them end up in pretty sad situations. So, but
Financially,
by
yeah.
emphasizing that and de-emphasizing education, we're actually doing our communities a very grave disservice.
Can I expand on that? I think that's a very great point. Definitely. I would even include this. A lot of people may say, oh, well, Dr. Carson, you're just biased against rappers and whatnot, and you're biased against basketball players. But I would say this. You have to look at things in red markets and red markets, saturated markets, and open markets. The fact of the matter is the people that you're watching on TV playing in the NBA are 0.0001% of the population, right? Whether you're white, black, Hispanic, whatever. When you're playing professional sports, it is essentially a red market. And if you're telling everybody, especially in a black community, hey, go play basketball and whatnot, that market becomes saturated. Same thing with rapping. For all the talk about, oh, like, Danny, you're just biased against what they're talking about in raps, which I mean, I guess I am. But the another point is, rap is an art, right? Art, like creative, I would say the creative fields, there's a very, very steep hierarchy in those industries. There are many actors who still need two jobs. And music is the same thing. There are many people outside of rap, right? Who may sing country, who may do country rock. I don't know. But the fact still remains that it fascinates me that the two places that the black community they want to be in happen to be the steepest when looking at the hierarchy, right? Yes, it's major reward at the top, but it's very, very unlikely.
Well, it's interesting because, if you play around with the numbers, you can make anything seem like a common phenomenon when it's incredibly rare. The same thing goes for police violence. You look at something like, what happened with the George Floyd case. And, they tried to make that seem like that's a common occurrence. That is way off the end of the bell curve. That police officer was a nutcase. And, there is no way that is a common phenomenon. And yet it's blasted all over the place, all over the world. This happens all the time, every day in America. And it changes people's perceptions. And it's one of the ways that the media is really shirking its responsibility to be honest. And that's a large part of our problem. The press is the only business that's protected by our Constitution. And the reason for that is because they were supposed to disseminate unbiased information to the people so that the country could be run on the will of the people, not on the will of government. And this is such an important point because governments will not preserve your freedom. Governments do what governments do, and that is grow and infiltrate and control. The reason that our founders spent so much time on the Constitution was to give the people a tool to control the government.
Definitely. I want to expand on the George Floyd point, the media point. The social media is definitely guilty in this as well. What are the things that get more clicks when you get on social media? Well, it's the things that anger you. When you're angry, you're more likely to share it. You're more likely to comment on it. And so, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're making a profit off of erroneously showing videos of police brutality. And in the perception is because in your experience, you're seeing this on social media again and again. Oh my God, another one of my people died or and whatnot. But it creates this erroneous facade that this is happening. This is happening very, I would say this is happening a lot. It there was this I forgot if it was a poll or whatnot, but I forgot if it was a poll, but the results of it was fascinating. Um, I think it was like those who were very liberal thought that over 1,000
Over a
or
thousand.
maybe it was
I
10,000,
saw that
over
poll.
1,000, yeah, oh yeah, over 1,000 black people were being killed by the police, and even conservatives overestimated the number
Mhm.
as well, and so it just really goes to show how influential the media is and how they're discarding their responsibility. If there's anything, just having from my personal opinion, if there's anything that I would say angers me the most is you having a responsibility to do something and just discarding it or not fulfilling that responsibility on purpose, right? So if you, yeah, I would say that, yeah.
Yeah, well, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 24, verse 10, 11, 12, it says, if you don't do something when you see injustice being done, God's watching you. He knows what you're doing. You have a responsibility to do something about it. But I'm curious as to how did your parents manage to escape the victim mentality that inflicts so many in the Black community?
My parents, I that's an interesting question. I would say that first is this first I would say and particularly with my mom, but both of my parents are devout Christians, but my mom, she's like, my dad is like the cooler one who's just like whatever. My mom is almost like the stereotypical aunt who's like waving her arms around during church and whatnot. So like my mom would tell me, I remember her telling me this at one point, that she told me, hey, if God wanted to make me rich, then I could be rich, but he didn't because he wanted me to serve him. And so it's impossible to be in a victim mentality if you believe that the unmoved mover, perfection itself, decided for you to be in this situation. And so no man will tell you, oh, you're here because you're oppressed. My mom would simply respond saying, no, God put me in this situation. My sons will probably take over and give me success because that's what God has given me as a gift. I would say another thing is both of my parents are immigrants, and so they've seen Haiti. They've grown up in Haiti. It wasn't a particularly, it wasn't a good situation. I think part of the reason why I've been able to escape woke politics is because my parents. I would go to Haiti with my parents every 2 years until 2020 because that's when the pandemic happened, so we couldn't really leave our houses. And so yeah, so me, I when I go there, I see what my parents had to go through when they grew up, and seeing seeing the fact that they didn't have electricity 24/7, they didn't have Wi-Fi. They grew up. It it really moves you, and I think for my parents, it's because they seen or they experienced that growing up. Oh, they have gratitude for what they have over here.
And they recognize opportunity when they see it. See, a lot of people
Yeah, definitely.
who are born here, there's opportunities all around them, but they can't see it until somebody else does something.
Definitely.
And then they say somebody else is taking their opportunities. But, there is so much available to people here if you will just avail yourself of it. I went to an inner city high school in Detroit. Uh, there wasn't a lot there, quite frankly. There wasn't a lot of emphasis on academic achievement, but there was Wayne State University. There was the Detroit Institute of Arts. There was all kinds of things that I could, with a little extra effort, avail myself of. Got involved with speech contests and a whole host of things that weren't available at my school, but with a little extra effort were available. And, that was something that my mother always drilled into us. You don't have to be a victim. There's always something that you can do. And she never accepted excuses. And I think it made a huge difference. Our friends criticized her severely. They said, your sons are going to grow up, they're going to hate you. But we didn't. We loved her very much. And one son became a rocket scientist and one became a brain surgeon. So she obviously had some clue as to what she was talking about.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely,
definitely.
sir. And thank you for sharing that, sir. That kind of brings up something I wanted to ask you both about. Speaking of parents, and Daniel, thank you for sharing about your parent situation, how that influenced you. So, being a kid, in school, you see some of this stuff at the ground level. What I'm reading is that all across the country, you see a lot of parents that are going to the school board meetings and really expressing a lot of outrage at this wokeness, especially at things like critical race theory, which some of the teachers are trying to teach to the kids. And you see a lot of parents come to these meetings saying, we want you to stop this. We don't like you teaching our kids that, they're a victim or they're an oppressor just by virtue of their race. We feel that's not fair. We want you to get rid of this curriculum. We want you to teach kids that they should be viewed by their individual character and their achievements, not based on race. We see really quite a deal of momentum where school board members are being recalled for the first time in history. We see a lot of challenges to the status quo happening at the local level. So do you see that kind of pushback happening where you're at? Do you see other parents there that are maybe standing up and saying, we don't want this happening? Do you see other students saying, we don't want to be taught, an ideology that says we're guilty or a victim just because of race? Do you see pushback? Do you see resistance against this wokeness where you're at?
That's for you, Daniel. I think he's frozen.
Nano, did we lose you there for a second?
Over here in New York City.
We have you a little bit, Manuel.
Well, while that issue is being resolved, I will say that, 3 weeks ago, I was in Loudoun County speaking to about 1,000 parents. And Loudoun County is sort of the epicenter where all the parental involvement is occurring. And they are very concerned about what's going on. I've found that in several of the places that I've spoken recently, in Texas, in particular, Florida. Parents are going to be, I think, the ones who are on the forefront of this fight.
Great, sir. Thank you for that perspective on what's happening around the country. And that's certainly very good to hear. Daniel, if we have you back, we kind of missed your answer for this question. So could you kind of share with us again, like what you're saying as far as resistance, where you're at?
Yeah. I was gonna say, in New York City, you're probably not gonna get as big of a pushback to CRT as much as Texas, or we're seeing a lot of things happening in Virginia right now. I would say this. Does that mean parents agree with the tenets of critical race theory? I definitely do not think so. The thing is, and I think this is a problem that many parents, or a grave mistake that many parents made during are making right now in America, and they're not noting, or they're not seeing what their kids are learning, and they happen to just think that, oh, they're learning their ABCs, or they're learning English, math, and whatnot, and they don't really look into it, which is a huge problem. One of the reasons why I would say, ideologues felt that they could start pushing this onto kids in K to 12 education, because most of the indoctrination used to happen in the universities. Is only very, very recent. It, K to 12 indoctrination in CRT, or at least at this level, it's been really, really recent. At least in my experience, most of the CRT infused lessons happened in the past 2 years, 3 years. And so I would say that they felt that they could do that because they took a bet, and they thought, hey, at least in college, students are away from their parents, they're in dorms, so parents won't be checking on their kids at university. I'm pretty sure they won't even be checking their kids, they won't be checking their K to 12 kids. And so they went on right ahead and started indoctrinating.
I think we're frozen again.
Yeah, it looks like Looks like we lost Daniel.
kids in K to 12. And so well it was a great lot of parents had to hear me.
Yeah, we've lost them again.
Do you guys hear me?
But those were very good points before the audio disappeared on us. I think it'll come back a little bit later.
Do you guys
on.
hear me?
We're not hearing you. Every other word, every third word we're hearing, maybe, if that much.
Yeah, it looks like we have lost Daniel here. So we're coming up on our time right now. There you are, Daniel.
Sorry for cutting out again.
No problem, Daniel. We're coming up on our time here. But just kind of in closing, I wanted to see Daniel as well as Dr. Carson, if each of you has a few brief words just to kind of reflect on what we talked about here and the state of things for a 17-year-old kid and what you're seeing, and maybe just very briefly on prospects for the future, maybe starting with Daniel, then closing with Dr. Carson.
So just so I could get this question right, you just want a reflection or maybe my ideas of what's going to happen in the future?
Yes, both of those very briefly as we close.
Well, I would say this. I think the response to my piece is very interesting. And so I've had many students come up to me, students who I normally would think are not necessarily conservative, and a lot of students in my school aren't conservatives, but they are, I would say, sensible. And so when they see me write this piece, they will say, hey Danny, like, I don't agree with your politics, but I do agree, like, we are in a crazy time right now, and I really want to get to a place where we can not have to care about who we're talking to for fear of being in trouble. I was talking, as a matter of fact, today in my economics class, I was talking to two people left of center, very left of center, who believe in who believe in Medicare for all, government Medicare and whatnot, and they say, yeah, I hate the crazy lefties on Twitter, and so for me, I would say there is a lot of people who do not agree with what is going on, and they want to move on. And we're not getting enough of those stories. All we hear in the media, in both left and right media, is how much the other side is evil, or how much the other side is misguided and whatnot. And I would say that, again, like Dr. Carson said in the beginning of this conversation, a lot of people have very good worldviews. A lot of people have thought out their politics. We may disagree with tax policy and whatnot, but the main thing, we need people to speak up, right? Closed mouths don't get fed. And if you think that if you stay silent for the next few years and this will blow over, it won't. I'll just tell you that right now, because if anything, the people in power, our government overlords, I don't think they're true believers. Do I think Nancy Pelosi actually believe in the tenets of woke ideology? No, they're using it to gain power. We see this with De Blasio. De Blasio was trying to post or have the Black Lives Matter murals plastered all over New York City. I remember seeing one when I was walking down in downtown Brooklyn. And now he has a vaccine mandate. Let's look at the definition of systemic racism again. Any inequities between races is sign of systemic racism. So De Blasio, in effect, implemented policy that was systemically racist. But does he care? No, he doesn't, because ultimately, at the end of the day, woke politics is being used by those in government to gain power. We need to wake up immediately and to stop it as soon as possible.
Thank you, Daniel.
Very, very insightful. Daniel, it fills my heart with pride to see a young man like you who is able to express himself so well. What we're really looking at here in the big picture are people who actually would like to see America fundamentally change. They don't particularly like our system. If you're a student of history, you'll recognize the pattern that is going on here. When Marxists move in, first thing they do is they identify a group who they say is causing all the problems. And then they begin to put restrictions on that group. And then they begin to penalize that group. And then they begin to incarcerate that group. And then they begin to kill that group. It's a well-known pattern. And we're seeing the beginnings of it. And that's why we have to stop it. We can't allow that. It is completely antithetical to the principles of the founding of this country. And we must also remember that our country has a Judeo-Christian foundation. We love our neighbors. We don't cancel our neighbors. And we help each other. We work together, even if we have differences. And that's one of the reasons that we've been able to accelerate and reach the pinnacle of the world in record time. We need to recognize that. We need to know that it's our responsibility to make sure that that can be passed on to the generations that follow us. And that cannot be done without courage.
Well, thank you for those words, Dr. Carson. And I'm so glad that the American Cornerstone Institute is at the forefront of being in that fight to make sure that the country we leave to the next generation does go in the right direction. And thank you, Daniel, for your courage. I know it takes great courage to stand up against the stuff happening these days. So thank you for just, speaking out, standing up, and not backing down. I think you are a great encouragement to many people. So thank you for that.
Amen.
And with that, thank you both for your time. And we will see everybody next time.
All right. Take care.